they overharvest. In fact, they overharvest worse than game theory predicts. So it's a really bad situation. But in field settings and in experiments that we've conducted where people are able to communicate with one another, we find that many, many times, but not all, but many, many times, they're able to solve these problems and increase the level of collective action. Now, finding cooperation in any setting turns out to challenge that basic conventional theory. So we've been challenging it for a long time. But out in the field, the number of factors that affect whether people cooperate or not is very large. And so the problem of, we can't just say this is the single variable that you have to change. Sometimes people say small groups will cooperate and large groups won't. Well, we found large groups that do cooperate. So what we're finding is instead of just a few factors that help us explain when it will happen, a list of factors is really very large, and it's a challenge for social science, but we're working on it. So what we need in terms of then how do we update that theory is to dig into our micro theories about individual behavior. And instead of assuming everybody is maximizing short-term self-interest, go to Herbert Simon as a good foundation in terms of the individuals don't have complete information, but they want to do well, and they can learn. So they have incomplete information, but they can learn over time. And individuals are particularly concerned about learning social rules. What are the other people in this area used to and do? And then people learn norms and various ways of other regarding preferences. Think about family situations. There's an immense number of collective action problems that people face in their household, including the dishes in the and many of those are solved by individuals without a huge amount of negotiation or even discourse. So the behavioral theory of the individual based on social psychology, sociology, and political science and economics on particular institutions is consistent with individuals cooperating in some dilemma situations, but that depends on context. And that word context is an incredible meaning in terms of exactly what we mean. There is not one definition of context. But we're finding many kinds of context that exist. And then we are finding that individual preferences and norms do vary. So to explain cooperation, we have now learned there isn't a single variable that's responsible for higher levels of cooperation. The big finding is that participants in dilemmas of one sort or another are apt to cooperate when they trust that others in that situation are cooperating. So trust is a very, very important variable. If we trust others to reciprocate, it reduces our fear of being a sucker. And none of us like being a sucker. That is and the resulting cooperation that can be achieved does increase during that. And it is possible then to get success. So to predict and explain how micro-situational variables and broader contexts affect trust are really really big challenge. So to think about this, we can think about a micro.
Upside down.
Well, we have broader context, broader contextual variables, and then we divide those into micro-situational and broader. They enhance the likelihood of learning and norm-adopting individuals that increase the levels of trust that others in that context are reciprocators. That leads to increased cooperation. That leads to net benefits. And there is a feedback loop, and it's very important to think about this. This at the beginning can be fairly low, but as you get more levels of cooperation, as the net benefits go up, they tend to go back. This is a very broad way of thinking about it, but it captures a great deal of what we're interested in doing. So when we've gone to the lab, and we've put a great deal of this into the lab, as I mentioned earlier, we find higher levels of cooperation in some settings than in others. When we did this in common pool resource experiments, where people were not able to communicate and learn each other's norms and that kind of feedback, they did not cooperate. But once we gave them an opportunity to communicate, as I mentioned before, cooperation levels went up. I was very surprised because I've been in the field often where I witnessed people in local communities sanctioning one another and monitoring what was going on. In our theory books, that was never mentioned. The idea of people monitoring each other and sanctioning each other was just not part. So I came back to Bloomington, sat down with Roy Gardner, my game theorist colleague who just passed away this last year, but he and Jimmy Walker and I worked a lot on the game theory experiment side. I said, how do we do a game theory analysis of sanctioning? And Roy did an initial game theory analysis. We pre-tested it and put it in the lab, and amazingly, people did sanction one another. That was we were the first to show that. And however, what we found is that the costs, as if we had to impose costs on people to sanction, the costs were actually reduced. The net benefits that people achieved, gross benefits went way up. Net benefits didn't. Unfortunately, in the literature, you can now see a lot of articles that misinterpret the early findings and don't recognize the difference. Studying common pool resources, and we looked at people who didn't communicate, didn't have any option to sanction, they overharvest. We gave them the opportunity to sanction, and they frequently used it, brought harvesting levels down, but costs up. Then we gave them the chance to communicate, and communication alone added to their net benefits greatly. And when they combined communication and being able to sanction, they didn't have to use sanctioning very much. And that's what we find out in the field. But it's very nice to have in an experimental lab where you really know exactly what's going on. So we are slowly but surely developing a cumulative understanding of which structural attributes a micro situation affects cooperation, which of those. And with a variety of experiments, a variety of field studies all over the world, we can identify some of those key variables. So one of them is higher marginal per capita return. Individuals see that their own contributions can make more of a difference than when there's low impact. And others are also likely to recognize it. So it does increase the likelihood of cooperation. Communication, if it's feasible, as I've mentioned several times, does enhance the likelihood of cooperation. The reputation of participants are known. And part of the reason that when people are forming in a group, they know one another, they know that other people in that group either are good cooperators or they're not. When people have a longer time horizon, they can reason that some of the cost of figuring this out will be paid off because of going over a longer time horizon. The capability of leading, of exiting for some groups and even others can make a big, big difference. Out in the countryside, that's a little hard, but in some urban areas, neighborhoods get a reputation of being cooperative, and sometimes people are able to leave from one neighborhood and join another. And the variable called security is one that can be dealt with in the lab very nicely. It's hard out in the field. In experiments where the people were told that if they contributed, but not enough contributed to really get a collective good, their contributions would be returned. So they were secure in doing this in a positive difference. Now we've also found ones that have mixed effect. So in terms of size of group, we find small, medium, and large having positive as well as negative. So it's not one of these things that it is always the case that small or large is positive or negative. And then a second one that sometimes is positive, sometimes negative, is the kind of information that is made available. Read the average contributions. So sometimes that's quite accurate and quite fast, and it will increase contributions, but other times not. And as I indicated, sanctioning capabilities, if combined with communication, as we found in the science paper, makes a difference. And heterogeneity of the participants, it can be positive or negative. So we can think of this then as a core set of the, here we have this core set again, and then we can be thinking about micro-situational variables affecting trust, cooperation, and social dilemmas. So when we are out in the field, we have some kind of combination of these variables, and we've been trying in the lab to be very consistent in showing where they are positive. And thus we have a theory and evidence, but we can't say this variable always produces this outcome. We have to be very careful about the way we do it. Now, how do we link the broader context to micro? And over time, we are recognizing that the micro context is very important. But in the lab, while I love laboratory research, it's excellent, you can't get a long-term horizon there. We have been developing slowly but surely a new diagnostic framework providing an overview of the components of a social ecological system that we need to be slowly but surely developing more and more. And we are looking at a focal system, and they could be any of a wide variety of focal systems like a lake, or a river, or a forest. There are any of a variety of resource systems that could be analyzed. And we then have been breaking that up into 4 internal systems embedded in 2 external. So if we look at it in this way, we think of resource systems and the resource units as setting conditions or inputs to an action situation. And for some of you who have studied our work earlier, our institutional analysis and design uses an action situation as a kind of core place where people are interacting, and those interactions lead to outcomes. But the governance system that they are in also affects what they can do. And the actors themselves are the ones who are participating in action situations. All of this embedded in larger settings and potentially smaller, depending upon which focal area you take. And we're going to be thinking about related ecosystems so that we have at one level a broad system of big variables interacting with others. And originally I presented this in PNAS in 2007, and then in a science article in 2009. A group of scholars are working with us, updating it slowly but surely. Originally I used actors, permanent users, and so instead of actors it was users. And originally I did not stress that the action situation was leading to interactions and outcomes. And people said, what happened to your action situation? Well, it was there, I thought. Sometimes you have to do that. So the ecology and society will be a special issue coming out in about a year that will have this as an introduction, and then a number of applications to ecological systems around the world. So we can think of this as the SES affecting that earlier analysis of the broader context affecting the micro context. But then we have to ask, is that going to be sufficient? And the answer is no. We have to then really dig in and unpack the variables within the resource system, within the governance system, within the actors that affect interactions and outcomes. And so we have to unpack that second tier. I warn you that many people who see this next level the first time go, so prepare for a little bit of complexity. So what this is inside the resource system. What is very important for us to understand is what kind of sector we're talking about, how clear is the boundaries, how big, what kind of human research facilities, what kind of productivity is there, what kind of equilibrium, what kind of location, storage, etc. What kind of governance, organization, non-government, NGOs, network structures, property rights systems, operational rules, collective choice rules, constitutional rules, and monitoring and sanctioning rules. So then we've got to think about, well, how many actors are there? What are their attributes? And this notion of history is really very important. Location, sometimes they're very close to the resource system, but other times they are far away. And sometimes they're located in an area where neighboring communities have already solved the problem, and in others they are located in an area where most people are fighting over it. What kind of leadership and entrepreneurship is involved? This is very important. What kind of norms, trust, etc. What kind of knowledge? How important is the resource system to them? They depend on it. And what kind of technologies are available. So these will not all be important every time you do a study. You have to be thinking through what are the key variables, but slowly but surely we're trying to develop a language that's shared across disciplines so that we don't fight over what was involved. We can slowly but surely use a common language. And this is what we're having. This is not a theory. This is posing a common language of things that we think affect outcomes. Yes, it's theoretical at that level. but it's not a final theory. So, as I indicated, some scholars overreact. They want to treat a social ecological system as a simple system. We've learned not to do that. Herbert Simon and Robert Axelrod and colleagues long ago taught us that we have to understand complexity, not predict it. So what we can be thinking of is as a general multidisciplinary language these various kinds of nested concepts or holons in many tiers. So which variables are important depends on the kind of question that you want to address. So when we ask, when are people likely to self-organize? Oh, pardon me, never that was simple. Many policies have been based on that, unfortunately, where the presumption is that external authorities have got this figured out. Somehow they're smarter than those of us facing the problem. But when will the users themselves organize? And slowly but surely we're updating the theory of self-organization we can posit that each harvesting actor in a resource system compares their own expected benefits of cooperating and changing the rules that they will be using in the future with the expected costs. And there are, no matter what we're talking about, there are always costs to change. So the actors have to ask themselves whether their incentive to change, I'm sorry. Oh, okay. Whether it is their incentive to change is positive or negative. Can you hear me now? So we can do that in a fancy equation. I won't spend any time. It's just whether or not the benefits are greater than the costs. If the incentive to change is positive for at least some of those involved, they need to estimate three kinds of costs.